It's the Brad and John Show.
And the show for April 7th, that's today's date. It's a Monday. This is C Block, which means we start about 7:40, looking at the run clock, and that's what we're doing right now. Okay, John, over the weekend, actually Friday afternoon, I heard an ad on The Patriot, 104.9 and I love this guy's voice. Keith Morrison from Dateline. You know what I'm talking about? The guy who's...
Oh, yeah, I know. An iconic voice.
The deep, and he talks very slow. I'm Keith Morrison, okay? The podcast is, you ready for this?
I'm ready.
The Thing About Pam. And
is this the Pam, the murderer lady?
Yes, the Pam Hupp thing.
Okay.
Absolutely, positively fascinating because of the fact the podcast is more about the behind the scenes of the whole Pam Hupp, where she, and the weird part of it is she still has never been essentially tried for the murder of Betsy Faria, and how the whole thing started. Her friend Betsy Faria was murdered, and her husband literally was convicted of the crime and thrown in jail for a couple of years, I believe. And then an attorney essentially fought and got an appeal, and essentially they retried the case, and he was judged not guilty. But the behind-the-scenes stuff is so interesting. And Keith Morrison the guy is so good. I'm thinking to myself, man, if I had a voice like him, I would just essentially walk in the studio a couple hours a day and probably make $300,000-$400,000 a year, and the rest would be history. Okay, it's so fascinating. The crazy story behind this is because some of this is actually audio that they stripped off a video that did, and some of it is original reporting they did where they actually stuck a microphone in people's faces, and it's all the various people involved. And the crazy part of the story is that if you go back, and I know, and he actually talks about the Renee Zellweger component. Do you know this whole part of the story?
Yeah, didn't she make a movie?
Yes,
didn't she play Pam?
Yes, and she contacted them. She contacted the movie producers and essentially say, look, I think there's an incredible, story to tell here, and I want the starring role. They didn't go after her. She went after the role, and they talked about the fact that every single day that they made her up, they had these prosthetics they stuck in her face and stuff like that to make her look like Pam Hupp. And every single day she went through this. Anyway, that's a sidelight of that. See, you got me weaving again. So the point was that, hold on a minute. In the original trial, they never, hold on just a minute, I got to clear my throat one more time. In the original trial, they never, the defense attorney, I think his name was Joel Silver, I think was his name, he was never allowed to put Pam Hupp on the stand. And not only that, if you go back and listen to all these audio tapes, and some of them were just audio, a lot of them were video, they stripped the audio off of, where the prosecutors are dealing with Pam, the police are dealing with Pam, and at one point, one of the police detectives is essentially saying, now Pam, I'm paraphrasing this, but this is what he's saying. Now Pam, I think this is what happened. A, B, C, D. Don't you agree with that? And I'm going like, hold on a minute now.
Like asking a leading question.
Right.
Or like trying to give her an answer there, or what?
Right. The police were essentially telling her, the detective was trying to say, okay, here's what you want to say about this. Here's what you want to say, A, B, C, and D. And I'm going like, no, hold on. That's not the job of the detective.
Yeah, for sure. Thank God there's body cam, right?
Right. Well, yeah. Well, this wasn't body cam. Most of this was like they were in interrogation rooms and things like that. If you get a chance to listen to it, I'm up to like episode 5 or something like that. And probably the most fascinating one was the Gumpenberger story, where and I'm telling you, after listening to this, I thought to myself, right here in our community, right here in St. Charles County, right here in the Westplex, these detectives that worked this case. Amazing work. When you hear the story behind the story of, and if you know the crazy story, briefly I'll tell you the story, that she, and turns out for like a couple of weeks, went to various places and was trying to find a stooge to essentially say that we're going to reenact and what this Kathy Hupp or Pamela Hupp was doing. She was essentially trying to get someone to reenact 911 calls. And she would drive around in neighborhoods and she would say, "Hey, my name is Kathy." And the interesting part of that is that was the name of the lead producer for Dateline. She'd say, "My name is Kathy and I'm a producer for Dateline, and I'd like you to come with me and I'll pay you $1,000 up front and I'll pay you $1,000 after we get done. I want to, recreate some 911 calls." So she picked up this, I can't remember his first name, his last name was
like some kind of transient guy, right?
Well, no, he was. Here, the interesting part of the story was, and once again, as the thing unwinds, he was, and the story behind his, and I do remember this, it all came back. He had been in some horrific car accident. He was like in his early 30s, and he had brain damage. And he was not, as his mom even testified, he was not 100% there. And
so not transient, but he was a little bit mentally deficient at the time.
Right, because he had this car accident where he had brain
sure.
damage. And he was very gullible, and he was very easygoing kind of guy. So she picks him up, takes him back to her house, and stages this thing where she calls 911, and they play the 911 call a couple times. And it sounds like, "Hey, John, you're the best guy in the world. I just think what you do is wonderful, and everything about you is great." It was so phony baloney. You know what I'm saying? It was like,
I get it.
And she actually shot him while she was on the phone with 911. And they say when they initially showed up at the crime scene, they were like, problem. The break in the case came when she said something. She was being interviewed, and she was saying something about, I can't remember what it was. And they said there was the last part of the interview. And she said, "Well, it's right here in my phone." And one of the detectives say, "Can we see that?" And she hands them the phone, and they say, "Can we keep your phone for a couple of days?" Then they go to the forensics lab, and they
what a terrible decision by her.
And they download all this geolocating stuff off her phone. They work with Google, and they essentially put together her whereabouts for 2 weeks when she tells them. And matter of fact, it's interesting, on the day of where she killed Gumpenberger, she says, "Well, I went to Best Buy and I went to and she gives them all these interesting details. Like, I went to the Hawks or whatever it was, the QT, and I got a free soda because I had my loyalty card that I cashed in." And they're going like, "Okay, nobody talks like this. Nobody gives us this. Nobody gives us this much detail." Which is pretty interesting. If you get a chance, it's pretty interesting. Now, hold on a minute, one more time.
And this took place, I just wikied it. It looks like it took place in O'Fallon, Missouri.
Well, yeah, but the murder was up in Troy, Missouri. The murder was up in Troy.
Yeah. But I guess she lived in O'Fallon?
Yeah,
then?
she lived in O'Fallon. And the interesting thing about it was there's all sorts of things about the case I didn't realize. Her and Betsy were best friends. They worked together at a state farm agency, and part of the deal was the fact that Betsy had this insurance policy, life insurance policy, which 4 days before the murder, Pam got her to change it to her being the beneficiary of the life insurance policy. And I won't give all the details, but that gets to be fascinating. It's called, once again, it's called The Thing About Pam. If you go and search it on any of the different podcast platforms, you can find it. It's pretty fascinating. Okay, couple more things to talk about, okay? St. Louis Public Radio. I know you peruse their site all the time. Did you see this thing they have on NPR about freedom of speech is shifting under the Trump administration? Did you see this story?
No. Is it a national story?
It's an NPR story, and it's
okay. I no, it doesn't ring a bell. I'm sure I saw it and skipped over it because it wasn't important.
Well, it
wasn't important to me.
It was published this morning at 4 a.m., published April 7th at 4 a.m. It's by Leo Fidel, Aruza Revanaza, Taylor Haney, Kyle Galago-Mackey. Are those local folks, or those are all NPR folks? Or do you recognize them?
No, I've never heard of them, so they got to be national.
Okay. They're talking about, I'll read you the first paragraph. Many Americans are worried that their First Amendment right to free speech is fading. NPR's Morning Edition has talked to legal experts, activists, immigration lawyers, scientists, students, teachers, and others over several weeks to understand why. Our series, The State of the First Amendment, the right from which all other things flow, will explore who felt censored before President Trump returned to office and who feels stifled now. Now, John, if I have to ask you a question, maybe this is biased because you and I are sort of against what happened during the Biden administration. Who was the finger on the scale of public information? Who was?
It was the Biden administration,
right?
And it was working hand in hand with Zuckerberg and the folks that used to run Twitter to censor inconvenient facts and opinion on social media.
Right. And if you publish something on a YouTube page, and still to this day, there's certain things that when we put the show up and John does his massaging of the YouTube version, there's certain things that we say that there's explanations that show up on the YouTube video, correct?
Yeah, you're right. Certain health topics, if we talk about COVID,
right,
or those type of things that we get flagged.
Right, and it's not. Well, is it technically getting flagged, or is it just?
Well, okay, it's not flagged, but they add a disclaimer to combat what they would presume would be misinformation. No matter if you're on their side, on Google's side, or you're a conservative, it's going to be flagged as find more information about this topic here.
Right. Now, one of the interesting things for me is that Twitter, now called X under Elon Musk, has essentially opened up the floodgates to, he's pretty much letting anybody say whatever they want, but there's community notes. Now, John, you're a Twitter guy. Explain what community notes are to people.
Yeah, if folks say something that is, first of all, your ability to add community notes, your ability to interact on Twitter is greatly enabled if you choose to get your account verified, or if you pay for premium. I don't, but some people do. You can, to your point, Brad, community notes mean if there's something that if some boomer shares a video from 2013 and says, "Can you believe what happened in Cottleville today?" Someone can create a community note that say, "No, Ethel, this actually happened 12 years ago in a different part of the country. This is not from Cottleville."
So in other words, what's happening is Musk has essentially made, to a certain extent, X self-policing. Would that be a safe way to put it?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. And real quick too, Brad, there are other community, for example, Reddit is generally considered a self-policing thing. Now, Reddit is very progressive, but in general, the community can come in and say, whoa, this dude is wrong about this. Go ahead.
Well, no, that's the interesting point to me. They're running this NPR thing, and they're essentially saying, "Oh, under Trump, it's so much more. Your viewpoints are being stifled." I'm going like, explain that to me.
How does that? And I don't see. And so, what's their argument? Like, where is it being stifled?
By Trump.
But where? On what platform?
That's my point. My point is, and what's interesting is Zuckerberg has come out and said, everybody thought he was like, he claims now that he was just, essentially they were forcing his hand.
Just following orders. Poor Mark was just following orders.
Right. But now he comes out and he says, look, we had people from the administration say, no, take that story down. And there was one guy, wasn't the story that there's some San Francisco FBI agent who literally was calling Twitter headquarters, or had like an inside line or a direct line or something like that, essentially saying, you got to kill that story. Wasn't that the story? One of the FBI agents?
That's exactly right.
Okay, so now, I don't know if that's going on behind the scenes now, but me being the journalist guy with 2 useless journalist degrees, if you had to ask me, and we're only, 3 months and not even really technically all 3 months. We're coming up on 3 months of the Trump administration. I would say, if anything, the floodgates have opened and you hear all sorts of diverse opinions, and Twitter has turned into very much of a free speech site. Facebook has, still has some limitations to it. But not only that, and I think that what you're seeing is even some of the very far left media organizations are essentially being held to a higher standard. Like, for example, the week before when they had the lady from NPR on the congressional hot seat, where she's just flat out lying about things she put on Twitter. I don't remember that. Well, she's not lying.
Yeah. And we went back and forth because I think there's a chance that she doesn't tweet for herself and probably had no idea what she tweeted.
Well, you're probably right as well, too. It's just like everybody thinks Elon Musk is grinding all those tweets. He's not. He's got people. Matter of fact, it's interesting that if you go way back to 2015, the guy is, I think his name is Dan Scavino. Does that name right?
That name. Where do I know that name from?
Dan Scavino or Scarvino or something like that. And it's an interesting story about how he left his wife and his kids and stuff like that. And he got to the point where he was like the the right-hand man of Trump, that he was the guy who was actually sending out all the tweets on Twitter, on Trump's Twitter account back in the day.
Yeah, it's Scavino. I just looked it up.
Scavino.
He previously served as White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Communications a long time ago. Yep.
And the interesting part of it was that and this is like what I call the asymmetrical warfare difference, that Trump didn't really have anybody, whereas you go way back when Hillary Clinton had paid professional photographers who were following around, and Dan was snapping pictures with his smartphone and sticking them up on YouTube and shooting short videos on YouTube and shooting stills on Twitter and Facebook and things like that, and tweeting all the time. And Dan was the guy who was like married, like almost joined at the hip with Trump, was always next to him. And the idea being he was a one-man PR person for Trump, whereas Hillary had all these professional people, and he was outdoing them 3-1 because of the fact that he was just like a machine. And
now that's government efficiency, Brad.
Yes.
Hey, speaking of nonprofit efficiency, it's really a crushing blow that we didn't talk about the fact that KDHX played K-Love content on Saturday morning.
I had that in my list, and I didn't think
Brad.
I didn't bring it up because
we got in our daily KDHX reference there, though. Isn't it great to turn on a local radio station and hear K-Love, Brad?
John, are you baiting me? John, are you baiting me? Is that what you're doing?
No, Brad. I'm just saying, isn't it great to hear McRadio on what used to be a local station? That's one of your favorite things, right, Brad?
Did you read that entire story? Once again, if you read the entire story, it ends with...
Oh, no, and Brad, what local radio station brought that story to us, Brad?
KWMU.
We are National Public Radio.
Which is interesting because they have all the details of the sale of that radio station, but no details whatsoever about the sale of their radio station. But the thing I told you before, when I said that when we had this original talk about KWMU, the whole thing about be giving to the friends of KWMU, and I say they're going to give it to them. And I said that KWMU was worth $10 million. Okay, if they got $4.8 million for KDHX, you don't think KWMU is worth double that?
I'd love to stay in chat, but I got Joe Manis calling on the other line, Brad.
Say goodbye, John.
See you tomorrow, Brad.
It's